Hello, everyone. My name is Wang, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Chemical, Environmental, and Materials Engineering at the University of Miami. So today I'm going to start a new course. It's called the Computational Methods in Engineering. So first, why should we take this course? All right. So why are we interested in computational methods in engineering? So first, if you think about or imagine about your future career, right, especially you're in the field of environmental engineering or chemical engineering, here I'm showing you a few photos or pictures of basically the future professionals in the environmental and chemical engineering domains, right? So you could be an air quality specialist, right, looking into the air quality data that are sampled or that are collected by various instruments. Or you could be a chemical engineer that's trying to look at how a entire or how a big chemical system is working. For example, it's related to separation or absorption, right? Or the collection or basically the collection of valuable materials from the chemical engineering process. Or you could be working in the energy domain, right? So looking at the renewable energy. And here you will be interested in you will be interested in the basically the installment or the energy efficiency of these renewable energy devices, for example, solar cells, or you could be working more closely to the environment, right? You could be basically monitoring the ecology, right? So to look at how the ecosystem is varying, right, in terms of let's say the drought, right, or wildfires, or floods, and so on, right? You could be looking into the soil health, right? So taking the soil sample and then examining the composition of the soil, or you could be looking at municipality facilities, for example, the water treatment facility or wastewater treatment facility. So if you look at all of these occupations, basically the job will involve sample collection, data analysis, and actions, right? For example, if you're an air quality specialist, you will use instruments to collect the samples of the air quality, right? And then based on the data analysis results, you will tell whether the air quality passed the standard or not pass the standard. If it doesn't pass the standard, then you need to take actions, right? The industries need to take actions. If you're a specialist working, a professional working with chemical engineering devices, then it's the same thing. We will monitor how the chemical engineering device is performing, right? For example, looking at the yield of certain chemicals, right? You collect a sample and then you analyze the sample, you analyze the data, and then you will think about procedures to enhance the property or enhance the efficiency or reduce the efficiency of these chemical engineering devices. Water treatment is the same. You collect the sample of the water, the wastewater, right? You conduct data analysis, the proper or accurate data analysis, and then conduct the action. I would say that no matter which, as I said, no matter which profession you're going to take in the future, which career you're going to take, you have to go through these processes. And I would argue that the data analysis skill is crucial among all of these three um, among all of these three procedures, right? You have to know how the system works, right? And then conduct the accurate data analysis. And a lot of these data analysis are actually sophisticated data analysis, which are not the ones that you can directly solve, easily solve with just, let's say, a pencil and a piece of paper, right? So you will have to rely on computational methods. And think about it. Sample collection, there are standard procedures, right? Actions is really dependent on your data. So basically, here, the data analysis, you have basically, this is a procedure that really will rely on the experience, right? Rely on the capability of this professional conducting the field work or conducting the related work, right? So that's why in this class, we're going to focus on the computational methods that we can use in our data analysis, right? Especially in the domain of environmental chemical engineering. Okay, so in terms of the data analysis methods, I would say, let's say before 50, right, 100 years ago, right? So people would just use pencil and a piece of paper and conduct a lot of these calculations on scratch paper, right? And then later on, we have a companion, a good friend, which is a calculator, right? And so we can easily use a calculator to um, do some more sophisticated calculations. And actually, I have to say that if you think about the Apollo missions, which is, I would say 50, 60 years ago, people actually heavily relied on calculators to conduct very direct calculations, or there are a lot of engineering devices that you can directly find the values of certain calculations, right? So those are really helpful. And if you think about how sophisticated this entire engineering process is, the calculator is really, really helpful for us to conduct a lot of engineering calculations. And later on, we started to have personal computers, right? We started to have a lot of helpful softwares. For example, Excel, right? It's a product coming from the Microsoft company. And then nowadays, people use MATLAB a lot for the data analysis. And there are also other software that we can use for conducting the data analysis, for example, C, C++, Java, or Python, right? There are different tools targeted for different types of data analysis or different types of software engineering purposes, right? So for example, here I'm showing you the interface of the Excel and MATLAB, right? And nowadays, right, we have another revolutionizing friend, which is the artificial intelligence, right? A few examples include ChatGPT, Gemini, Grok, DeepSeek, right? So when they first come out, well, they're very, very impressive. Basically, they can argue a lot about a lot of things, even computational things, with sufficient accuracy. But then we also have to be cautious, right? That's why I put smaller question marks here, because they do not always give you the right results. And a lot of the times, the accurate result coming from the AI really relies on the prompt that you put into the system, right? So that's why there are basically newer domains or newer professional domains. People created this domain called the prompt engineering, right? Although I don't know if that's a real thing, but basically it highlights how important it is for the user to rephrase the problem, right? It relies on your understanding of this, and for example, the chemical and environmental engineering process before you throw the question directly to these large language models, right? So no matter what, your understanding of the data analysis is important. You cannot, or we cannot directly throw our mathematical or engineering problems to these models. Okay. So basically for our class, we're just going to focus on the computational methods, right? Especially Excel and MATLAB. Actually, we're going to spend a lot of time working with MATLAB. We're only going to talk about Excel briefly in this first class. If you're interested, you can actually also explore other programming languages, especially nowadays. Python is very popular. It's a free software that people use for data analysis. But due to the time limit, we won't cover the Python here. And I have to say that because now we have these large language models, the programming is also a language, right? So that's why these AI models can do really well in translating your language from MATLAB to Python. So that's why they can be really good studying companions for you. Basically, you can try to convert your MATLAB language, or MATLAB codes to Python codes if you want to study how to program in Python. Okay, so if we go over the objectives of this class, they include the following. I'm just highlighting these important ones, right? So for example, how to solve mathematical problems in MATLAB or Excel, how to identify appropriate numerical techniques for problems involving linear systems, nonlinear equations, optimization, data fitting, how to use proper statistical methods. So we're going to talk about statistical methods later on in the second half of the semester, right? To analyze the data collected from the engineering process, how to apply numerical methods to the model or to the code that you created to solve real world problems in these chemical engineering or environmental engineering systems. And we will know how to critically assess limitation of these numerical approximations, numerical methods. And also, there is going to be a team project for you to work collaboratively to analyze problems, to come up with code solutions, and communicate among yourselves. Okay. So in terms of the textbook for this class, so both of these textbooks are available online. I do not require you to have a hard copy. So the first one is the MATLAB for Engineers, 5th edition by Holly Moore. The second one is Numerical Methods for Engineers, 8th edition by Stephen Chapra and Raymond Canal. So basically, the second one actually focuses a little bit more on the fundamentals of the numerical methods, while the first one is more about a tutorial for using MATLAB. And we're just going to mostly use this first textbook, right, to go over the problems. But if you want to understand fundamentals or the limitations of the MATLAB programming or the Excel programming, you can refer to the second textbook. So in terms of grading, there are 3 exams. Each exam represent 20 points in total, right? So that will give you 60 points in total. And then in terms of homework, we almost have homework for every week. And then the total points is 25 points. As I mentioned, there's a team project, which is 15 points. And then there is also an in-class quiz, which is 5 points. Again, I mentioned that you have a teaching assistant. And then in terms of the office hour, that's actually going to be the time before the class. So in terms of the requirements for the homework assignments, all the assignments will be submitted on Blackboard because you will be coding a lot. So assignments are due on Tuesday's lecture. You can submit before or during the Tuesday's lecture, although I strongly recommend you to submit before the Tuesday's lecture. So late homework will have 20 points deducted if you don't have any excuse. So please be neat, labeled, and organized for your homework, especially for coding. It's better to have a good coding habit, which is helpful for yourself and also for your colleagues in the future. Know the answers clearly in the appropriate units. So especially here, we like the standard units, which is the international units. Feel free to work with each other, but do not copy or plagiarize. And also let me know in advance if you will be missing a lecture, so your quiz will not be counted. Especially about the copy or plagiarize. So nowadays, as I mentioned, you can feel free to use, it's free to use any of the large language models. Right? For example, I normally will use let's say the ChatGPT or Copilot for a lot of my work, right? But here, in this class, I also feel that it's good practice to use these models in your homework, right? While you basically work on these different homework problems. But the importance is that you need to understand what the problem is about, right? As I mentioned, the prompt is very important. You need to give these models a very clear prompt, which means that you have to understand the problem yourself. Otherwise, you may get very different results. And I will encourage you to, for example, throw some of the homework problems to these models and see if it can give you the right answer, right? But importantly, you have to know how these models work or how these data analysis approaches work for yourself. Okay, so here's our class schedule. So this is basically the layout of our class. In the first class, we're going to talk about the introduction to Excel, but starting from our next class, we're going to use MATLAB a lot. Actually, I would say we're going to work with MATLAB for more than half of the semester. Okay, so here I circle out some boxes because there may be some changes of my schedule and we may have a different format of class in the future. So I have labeled the time for the exams. And as you can see, I would say the last third of the semester, we're going to talk about statistics and start a little bit about the machine learning, because nowadays machine learning or AI has been very important in all different fields. It is good in that in this class, we at least know what machine learning is about, right? And all in general, how do artificial intelligence works? And we also have a few classes giving you different example problems in environmental and chemical engineering, right? So that we can work together. Okay. So here in this class, we're going to start with the Excel, right? So as I mentioned, we're going to start with introducing the Excels. I'm not sure how many of you have used Excel or how proficient you are in using the tool, but here I will just give an overview of the program, right? And then we'll do some practice with the Excel. So as you can see, basically, before Excel, well, we have been using calculators for the solution of specific problems. But once we start to manage large data sets, or basically large data sets, the calculation cannot be done or should not be done at single points anymore. Right? Cannot keep typing on our calculator. And that's where the computational tools become important. Right. So this is the user interface of the Excel, right? This is the user interface that you see from Windows, and this is the one in Mac, right? But either systems, the functions are similar, right? The programming is also similar. Okay. So here in this first class, we're just going to cover 3 aspects of Excel. So basically, I'm going to introduce some operations, basic operations and functions in Excel. We want to solve problems with a goal seek, right? Goal seek. So those are targeted for more sophisticated problems where basically you can solve or you can find a solution to a complicated problem. And also I'll introduce how we can use Excel to do basic or very easy data visualization, interpolation, and plotting with error bars. Okay. So now we're going to start with examples. So the first example is about the ideal gas law, right? So now let me go to the Excel. So right now I'm using Excel in the Word, no, in the Microsoft system, right? This is how the Excel is going to look like. So well, instead of creating a new one, let me just use the course material that I will upload onto Blackboard. Okay, so this is what we normally can see from the Excel. Okay, so inside the Excel, there are different types of basically the whole Excel is shown in this table format, right? You know that. So here, these are different rows, right? These are different columns. So the columns are named by letters, the rows are named by numbers. It's almost like a chessboard, right? If you play with chess. So, and then there are different types of, I would say, inputs that you can put into the Excel. For example, you can text some letters or words, right? We call this as a string. You can also type in numbers. If you type in leftover words, right? Let's say class 1. This is recognized as a string. So you can see that naturally the string is aligned to the left, right? And then if you type in a number, let's say class 1, then it's aligned to the right. And you could also type in formula. So what formula means is that instead of typing in these known values, you can, for example, you just have had class 1 and 1. This cell to be the class number that's after this class. Then we could just type equal sign. This is starting to create a formula, right? And then you click on this cell to use the value in this cell, and then plus 1, right? That's going to be class 2. And you can also do sophisticated calculations. For example, C2 plus C2 to the power of 4, although it's still 1, right? Or plus exponential of 1, right? Of C2. So that's basically the e to the power, right? So that's the exp is exp of something is the e to the power of x, right? This is defined in Excel. Okay. So as you can see, when I type in this one, it's recognized as a string. So that's why it's aligned to the left. Okay, so here we're talking about different functions. And in in Excel, basically there are some functions that you will use quite commonly. So you can find these functions from here. So fx, right? And then, for example, here is showing you the most recently used for all of them, right? So the most recently used are the ones that I have used. For example, sum, that's the summation. Average, you're trying to average a range of values, right? If it tells you whether that's true or not, right? And then max, finding the maximum value. The sine, finding the sine value of an angle, and so on and so forth. So you can basically find statistical. This is going to include quite many functions that's in the statistical domain. And then engineering, there are some like Bessel function, although these are quite uncommon for our class right now. But these are the ones that I commonly used in Excel. So for example, I use these functions quite a lot when I try to log your final score, right? For example, you have your homework 1 through homework 13 or 14 scores, and you have midterm, you have projects, and then I'll have to do the summation, average, and try to find the standard deviation, so on and so forth, right? If I want to group students, right, in different teams, I will use generate random numbers for you, and then to basically group you guys randomly, try to find the maximum score, minimum score, and so on and so forth. So for example, sum is a summation. So if you have a range of values, let's say 1, 2, 3, and you want to find the summation, you will do sum and then select these cells. Okay, so that would be 6. And plus, let me just mention here that although I used all capitalized words over here for these functions, you don't have to use the capitalized words. Basically, here it cannot tell you the difference between capitalized or lowercase. Okay, although I think the system will convert your lowercase letters to capital letters. Average is the same, right? So you can copy the same thing, or let's just type in random numbers, right? 9. And then if you want to find the average value, you will do average and then bracket and then select these cells. Okay, so if you see that the selection is B7 to B9, right? This is showing that it's a range of the values, right? So it's B7, if you see B7, B8, B9. Okay, so you could also select the cells one by one, which is this one, comma, this one, comma, this one. Okay, so you get the same thing. Standard deviation, right? STDEV, right? So you can still copy these numbers and just Control C and Control V, and then STDEV. And normally, you will use the STDEV.P to calculate the standard deviation, right? So if you check the standard deviation, there are different definitions here, right? STDEV.P, STDEV.S. So there are differences in terms of the calculation for the standard deviation. So then the next is the random number, right? So you can, if you want to generate a random number, you can just do rand and then put a bracket here, and then it's going to generate you a random number between 0 and 1. Okay, so the interesting thing is that every time we update a value near the basically near the cell, it's going to give you a new random number. Okay, so for example, if you type in something here, yeah, the entire sheet, right? So if you type in a new number or edit the entire spreadsheet, it's going to give you a new random number. So that's why if you want to fix certain random number that you already generated, you will copy that and paste the values only. Okay, so then if you, for example, try again, you can see that original function, the value in the function cell has been changing, but since this one, you just copy the value here, it's not going to change anymore, right? This is the random number generator. So the way I use the random number generator is that I will basically list all of you guys' name, and then I generate a random number. And then I will copy the whole column of random number and then divide them. For example, if I want to divide them into 4 teams, then I will choose the ones with the value, let's say between 0 and 0.25 to be one team, 0.25 to 0.5 to be one team, 0.5 to 0.75 to be one team, and 0.75 to one team. Right? So this way you basically generate the entire groups randomly. Right? You can also have the max function. So normally if you have a very long column of numbers, right? So here we can still use this one, but let's say if you have 1,000 values, one example could be now we're sampling the air quality, right, at in Miami, and then we have done sampling for a whole year, right? And each day, every hour, you generate data. So, but now we want to see the maximum air pollutant concentration, right? So as you can imagine, it's going to be generating 365 multiplied by 24 data points in total, right? So if you go through the entire column, it's not so easy to find the maximum value. So then you can use the max function, right? And then it's going to return you the maximum value. You can also find the minimum value, right? So you just need to change the max to min, and then it's going to give you the minimum value. And then similarly, I mean, a lot of these calculations, you can also do that in your calculator, right? And then in your calculator, you can also do rounding. A lot of times, I think the rounding or rounding the number to integers, you can decide it yourself. Okay, so for example, if you find or calculate a problem and then find out the final answer is 5 point something over here, right? And now you want to round it to the next, let's say the next integer. So what you will do is you will type in round, and then you can decide how many digits you want. Right? If you want to do an integer, then you will just do 0, because now this number digits, right, is the one that you want, number of digits you want. So you can use 1, and then it's going to give you 5.2, right? Because you see the 5 is rounded up to 2. And then you can also do 5.2 digits, right? Then it's going to give you more digits. This is rounding. And then you can also do ceiling. So this is, I would say, more related to the engineering design. So for example, now we're trying to build a wastewater treatment system, and then we have to divide the system into several compartments, right? Or several, for those who have taken the fundamentals of environmental engineering, we have to come up with different sand filters, right, to remove the pollutants in the drinking water, right? So basically, the suspended particles in the drinking water. So if you come up with an engineering design and find out that you have to make 5.2 sand filters, so what do we do? Do we round it down, right, to 5? No, right? Because if it's 5, then it's not sufficient enough for you to conduct the job of removing the pollutant. Actually, we will round it up, right? But the rounding will only round that to the nearest number. So basically here we want to find the integer that's basically above the value here, right? So if it's 5.2, we round it up to 6. If it's 5.9 or 5.8 or 5.9, we still want it to be 6. So this function is called the ceiling function, right? You're sort of trying to find the ceiling of a number, right? So you would type in ceiling.math and then just put this value here, and that will give you 6. And similarly, there could be engineering problems that want us to find the integer that's below a certain value. For example, 5.2, and we want it to be 5, or 5.9, we still want it to be 5. So then you will type in floor.math, and then put this value. So that will give you 5. Right? So these are the common functions that I would use a lot of times in my problem solving. Okay. So as you can see, basically we're now sort of repeating what a calculator can do, right? So then you may have the question, well, we already have the calculator. Why do we have to do everything with a laptop, right? With a computer? Why can't we just use calculator for all the jobs that we do? As I mentioned, in the future, when you're working with data analysis, you're going to work with a large data set, right? So it's not going to be only one single point. And this is when the computer analysis can be very helpful, right? So here I can give you an example. So here, this is the application of the ideal gas law, right? We know that the ideal gas law, if you represent it in the equation, that's going to be PV equals nRT, right? So P is the pressure, right? So if I type it out, P is the pressure, right? And it also has certain units, right? So it's not random units, right? Here to we normally use atmosphere or Pascal, right? So let me just finish everything. So here you have P, which is pressure, right? T is temperature, right? N is the number of moles, right? V is the volume of the gas, right? R is a gas constant. So what is the value of R? So the value of R is 8.314. This is the one that you normally use, right? Joule per mole per K. So we should note that the R only takes this value when everything else takes the standard units, okay? So if I type it out, it should be if everything else takes the standard unit, right? Which means that here the P should be Pascal. Temperature should be Kelvin, right? And the number of moles should be mole, and the volume should be meter cubed. Okay. So basically here, using this relationship, we can find out, we can do the conversion of any, for example, any number of moles or any temperature, pressure, and do the conversion, or for example, calculate the volume, calculate the pressure, and so on and so forth. Okay, so for example, here is one question. So what is the volume of 1 mole of oxygen under normal condition, which is 1 atmosphere and 25 degrees Celsius? Okay, so if we type in start typing here, it's 1 atmosphere. We know that it's 1.01 multiplied by 10 to the 5th Pascal, right? So how do we, right, just write out 1.01 multiplied by 10 to the 5th, right? So if you type in here, you can see that it's recognizing this value as a string, right? So if you want to use the actual value, because you have this here mainly because it cannot recognize this upper triangle value, basically the upper tick symbol, right? So it's recognizing that as a string, and that's why it cannot read the value. So if you want the MATLAB, want the Excel to read the value, you will have to type in an equal sign, right? So now it will give you the value here. An easier way to show these large numbers is just to use 1.01 e to the 5, okay? 1.01 e5, it means multiply by 10 to the 5th. So if I just write it out again, so it's 1.01 multiplied by 10 to the 5th. If you want to show that, you will use 1.01 e5. Okay. Well, you should write as 1.01 e5. So now you're putting the standard pressure, or the normal condition pressure, right? So R, we know that it's 8.314, right? Temperature, 25 degrees Celsius. We have to convert it to Kelvin, right? So we know that is 25 plus 273.15, right? So you will get the temperature in Kelvin, right? We're talking about 1 mole. So now you can calculate the volume. So PV equals nRT, then V is nRT divided by P. So you will have N multiplied by R multiplied by T divided by P. Right? So we should note that here, the volume is using meter cube. So instead, let's try to type in all of these units here to avoid confusion. joule per mole per K. Temperature, Kelvin, and then N is mole. Okay, so then you can calculate basically what is the volume of the oxygen. And if you further want to convert this into liters, because I know that a lot of times people use liters to show the volume of the gas. So we know that a cubic meter to liter, a cubic meter is actually 1,000 liters, right? So then you will use equal sign this value multiplied by 1,000. Okay, so this is the calculation here. So now let's say that, well, we have changed our idea. Instead of having just this single point calculation, which you can do with your calculator, now we want to generate a table, right? We're now interested in the property of the oxygen under a range of pressures, okay? So instead of 1 atmosphere, we want to find out the pressure from 0.5 atoms, we want to find out volume of the oxygen and pressure change from 0.5 atmosphere to 1.5 atmosphere. We also want to calculate these volumes with 0.1 atmosphere as the increment, right? So basically 0.5, 0.6, 0.7, all the way to 1.5. Okay, now how do we do that? So we know that this is 1 atmosphere, okay? So now we want to create something that basically calculate a range of pressure. Okay, so instead of doing this point by point calculation, we basically have to use the function of the Excel by creating this data set, right? And you don't have to, let's say, put in 0.1 multiplied by 1.01 E5, and then type in all of these values, right? Type in all of these values here, copy these values here, and then do the calculation, right? You don't have to do that. And our G divided by P. Okay, we don't need to do that. So instead, we can use this automatic calculation from the Excel. So let's now create a new column, which is the, let's say the ATM, right? The pressure in ATM. So we said that we want 0.1 to be the increment, right? So start from 0.1, right? And then we'll increase by 0.1. It start from 0.5. Okay, so now it goes to 1.5. This is the range that we want. So we know that 1 atmosphere, we need to convert that to Pascal, right? So basically, to calculate that, you will use this value multiplied by 1.01 e to the 5. Okay, so now how do we do that? How do we do the calculation of the pressure? Okay, we just drag it down. Okay, so if you actually double click on the value here, you can see that the Excel automatically use the value here multiplied by 1.01 multiplied by 10 to the 5th. Okay, so it is calculating the Pascal values directly from the value that you added over here. Okay, so you can try doing the same, right? If you drag it down, it's 8.314, mainly because these are values, right? You're not changing temperature either. So if you drag it down, it's the same thing. If you drag this one down, it's the same thing. And now if you drag the volume down, it's going to use this new pressure that you calculated in each row, right? So now you get the volume of the oxygen, right? Volume of the gas under different pressure. And now you can imagine calculating all of these values one by one with your calculator. It's going to take a lot of time. You can convert it into liters. Okay. So now you can see that in this calculation here, we are actually having a bunch of values that are having fixed values. Okay. So, I mean, having all of these fixed values, of course, they can work for your calculation, but at the same time, we want our Excel spreadsheet to be concise, right? To be, I would say, occupying less redundant information, right? So in that case, how do we replace these values? I mean, remove these values from these columns, okay? So the way we can do it is we can just copy these values out. For example, put it here, right? And then we can remove these columns. What happens is that I'm gonna delete all of these columns, right? So now you can see that it's having a reference issue because now we don't have those values anymore. So now, if you recall the equation for PV equals nRT, we have to use the value of N multiplied by R multiplied by T divided by P, right? So this is the volume again. But now if you drag it down, it's actually going to refer to the value below these lines, right? Because now we don't have the same number that was shown in here anymore, right? It's using the new reference values. So that's where we can start to use the absolute reference, which basically, if you want to fix these values, right, fix these constants using the absolute reference over here, you will type in a dollar sign. You type in the dollar sign before the row number and the column letter, okay? Okay, so now you have this function here, and then now if you drag it down, it's going to use the same value over here, right? That's the absolute reference that you can use to do the calculation. So this will make your spreadsheet more concise, okay? So now let's make the problem even more sophisticated, okay? So I'll just copy these values over here, right? So you can see that even if you copy the cells away, it's still going to use the same. It's going to basically trace where you put the cells on. Okay, so now let's make the problem even more sophisticated. So now we're calculating from 0.5 to 1.5, and now we want it to be basically 0.1 to 1.5 for pressure, but also in terms of temperature, we want to vary it from 0 degrees Celsius to 1000 degrees Celsius. So now we want to create a whole table of this oxygen gas in terms of its volume, right? So we know that the temperature, we can create new rows, right? So basically each temperature, each pressure is going to have a new volume, okay? So now you have temperature shown in here. I already converted into Kelvin, right? We have to use the Kelvin as a unit when we calculate with the ideal gas law. So you basically add these numbers by 273.15 to get the temperature in Kelvin. And now you have to calculate the volume. So what is the volume? So the volume now is going to be N multiplied by R multiplied by T divided by pressure, right? And here we should also note that the N, the number of mole, should be using the dollar sign. We have to use the absolute reference. And the same for the R here. Okay, so now you can drag the values down. Okay, so it's using the same value here, right? So it's using the same set of value. And let's see. Oh, here we have to use the same temperature. So that's why the temperature, we also need to add the dollar sign because we do not want to change the temperature for each column, right? So then that's going to be, so that is going to be, let me see. Here. Should not be changing. And then just drag it over. Okay. So this is a new volume for this combination of the temperature. We can compare over here. So basically we started from 0.5 to 1.5 over here, right? Temperature here is using 0 degrees Celsius and here is using 25 degrees Celsius. And they're not that different. Overall, they're not that different. So then to do the calculation over here, then you will have to drag it, right? So now we have to use the correct reference again, because now we cannot use the temperature that we had over there. And then we have to use the new set of pressure, which is over here. Okay, we just need to be careful overall that we are not changing the the absolute we're using the correct absolute reference, right? So this is the one that we're using, right? It's using temperature that should be used, right? So it turns out that actually here it's getting more sophisticated than we thought, because now we have to use or we have to change the function every time we change to a different temperature. And now you drag it down. So let's just do this, drag everything here, and we should note that these are not the correct values, right? You need to change the absolute reference of temperature over here and then divide that by the pressure, and then you put that down. The same thing here. You pull the temperature to the right one, you pull the pressure to the right one, and then because now you can check all the other values, right? So for example, here, 400 degrees Celsius and 0.5 atmosphere, it's using the your targeted or desired values over here. Then check over here, temperature here, pressure here. Same thing, temperature here, pressure here. Temperature here, pressure here. So now you can see that if you want to generate the entire table or entire matrix, it's starting to get quite cumbersome, right? So you have to change the equation every time you do the automatic calculation, which is something we don't want, right? So right now we have a let's say it's a 10 or 11 by 15 table, but later if you have even bigger table, let's say 100 by 100 table, so by then we cannot use this manual change anymore. This is actually going to be a quite easy problem that can be solved by MATLAB, which is why we want to introduce MATLAB in our class, right? So we can simplify a lot of these data management or data analysis processes. So now you can see that we use the Excel to calculate the volume of oxygen under a range or array of pressure and also under array of temperature. Okay, so we're using the absolute referencing over here. Okay, so this is a basic operation. I encourage you to do more practice with Excel and basically try to know this tool better, because you're going to use that quite a lot. Okay, so as we mentioned, this class we're going to basically look at three features. First is basic operation and functions. The second one is solving problems with goal-seek. Right, the third one is data visualization. So let's go to the second one. The second one I created in this tab here. This is the goal-seek. So basically, goal-seek is trying to find the goal or trying to find the value of certain functions, right? So we can start from a very simple function. For example, let's say we have a function of y equals 3 multiplied by x plus 2, okay? And then we found that y equals 11. What is x? Right. Okay, so this is a very simple question, right? So you can easily derive it with a pencil and piece of paper, right? So you can have x equals y minus 2 divided by 3, right? So then x will equal 3, okay? And so actually you can use the Excel to do the solution or to solve this problem. So the way you can do that is you can first list x and y, right? You can type in any value here, and then you just use this equation here. We said y equals 3 multiplied by x plus 2, right? So this is a value here, and you can change it. You can change to different values, right? Try different values, and then the y is going to change, right? So now, basically, the goal seek is trying to find out when y equals something, what is x? Okay, so as I said, it's a very easy problem to solve by hand. But later on, I mean, in engineering, there are a lot of nonlinear systems that is kind of difficult to derive by hand. But let's just show how the goal seek works. So to do the goal seek, you'll go to the data tab, right? So both on the Mac version or on the Windows version, and then you will go to what if analysis and goal seek. So you will basically, you're trying to set this cell to the value of 11, right? By changing the cell of X. So now click OK. So you see, I found the value of 3, right? So let's try again. So 11, I'll change the cell here. You see the function, or Excel is trying hard to change different values, right? Now it found the value of 11, okay? So if you read the other textbook, the second textbook that I introduced in the PowerPoint slides, actually that is going to introduce how Excel, how a lot of these computational software or the algorithm that these software use for finding the solution. Okay, so as I mentioned again, this is a very simple example, right? So there are sophisticated ones. Since you guys are in environmental engineering or chemical engineering, let's look at environmental engineering problem. Okay, so here we're talking about organics in water, right? So as we know, the pollution that a lot of people, a lot of society generates end up in the river, right? End up in the water body. And typically, the nature itself can get rid of these pollutants by the natural process. And especially, this is especially true for the organics in the water. So what happens is that once these organics, for example, protein or sugar or biomass, right? So which can contain a lot of organic mass. So once these organics end up in the water, there are also a lot of living organisms, algae, right? Micro organisms or bacteria that can consume these organics, right? And further convert it into carbon dioxide and water. So it can reduce the concentration of these organic pollutants. So in general, the reduction of these organics follow an exponential decay, okay? With the mass of the organics, right, at any time equals the initial mass multiplied by exponential minus kt, right? T is time here, right? K is the reaction rate constant. Okay, so as you can imagine, if you have a very high reaction rate constant, right, so the decay is more rapid. If you have a lower one, the decay is slower. So, and for those who have taken the environmental engineering class, introduction to environmental engineering class, we know that a higher temperature will result a higher or larger K. Right? That's why in a hot summer day, if you place an apple outside, it will quickly go bad, right? But if in the winter, or let's say winter in the northern of the part of the United States, right, where it snows, if you leave an apple outside, it can keep frozen or can keep well for weeks or months, right? So the reaction rate constant is smaller. Okay, so now let's assume that we are an environmental engineer, and then we sampled sampled some water from a water body, let's say from a lake. So I can insert some shapes here. Let's assume that we have a bottle. This is our bottle. Okay. We just draw the cap. All right. So now the problem is saying that, well, it has when we sample the water, it has an initial organic mass of 100 grams. And the reaction rate is 1 per day. What is mass of organics after 10 days? So it's quite easy to solve because we know we're trying to solve M, right? We know M0. M0 is 100 grams. So we know that M is going to be exponential minus K, which is 1, multiplied by T, which is 10 days. And then you will multiply that by M, right? So M, let's see, just put it here first and then drag it down. That's C6. Okay, so you see that after 10 days, the mass of the organics is 0.0045, which is very small. No, right? Exponential decay, which is very fast. Okay, so we can do the similar thing here, but the problem reversed, right? So if the mass of organics in the water sample is 5 grams after 3 days, and the initial mass is 100 grams, what is the reaction rate constant? So now you know M and M0, you know time, you're trying to solve K, right? So this has, I would say, actual implications because for different water bodies, as we said, the organics are dissolved by microorganisms, especially bacteria. And different water bodies can have different types of bacteria. Some of them can have very strong bacteria, some of them have very weak bacteria, and it also depends on temperature, as we mentioned, right? A lot of times we have to derive, or environmental engineers have to derive the actual reaction rate constant for different water bodies. And they do that by monitoring what is organic mass, right? To collect the water sample, what is the actual organic mass. So now the problem converts to trying to solve K based on M and M0. Okay. So you can see that now we have M being here, right? So we can still use the same equation. We don't know what is K. We can try to put 1 here, and then we put 3 over here, right? And then we know that M0 is 100 again. So now M is, well, if K is equal to 1, M is close to 5, right? So you can try different values of K. For example, use 2. If it's 2, then it's too small, right? It's sort of to be 1.2 or 1.3 something. So now to solve this problem, basically, of course, you can still derive it because now we know M equals M0 exponential minus KT. You can derive this equation by having M divided by M0 equals exponential minus KT, right? And further, you can take the log, natural log, right? So then you have minus KT equals natural log of M divided by M0. Okay. We have to remove the equal sign here. Oh, we have even can't have the equal sign here because equal sign is going to recall or recognize it as a it's going to recognize it as a function. Basically, you can take the natural log and then you can have actually K. You can derive it on paper, right? It's going to be negative natural log of M divided by M0 divided by T. Okay. So here, if you have the value, right? If you have the M or M0, so you can calculate, that's going to be log. Basically here, the log log is a natural log. So if you want to use a base of 10, you will use log of 10, right? So if you use natural log, and then 3 divided by 5 divided by 100, you put a minus sign here, and then divide by 3 days. So now you can solve what is K here. Okay. So basically, you can still solve this problem by using pencil, piece of paper, and a calculator, right? Because the equation here is not nonlinear. It's still sort of linear, right? It's a direct logarithmic equation. So now the problem can get even more complicated. Now you can see how the problem is limited, how your solution is limited by just using a calculator. Okay, so let's say that there are 2 water samples, same water samples. Okay, two same water samples, and one is stored for 1 day and the other stored for 3 days. We're trying to let it decay. And then the samples were accidentally mixed together. It could be that from some operation, we thought that they were stored for the same time and we were trying to mix together. And then now you realize that, hey, they're having a different property here, right? So then the organics is found to be 30% of the initial organic mass. What is the reaction rate constant? So now if we list out the process with the equation, right? So the mass is the actual mass, right? That's found in the two bottles, right? So mass is going to be m0 exponential minus k multiplied by 1, right? Plus m0 exponential minus k multiplied by 3, because the other one was stored for 3 days. Okay, so one is for 1 day, the other is for 3 days. And then you can divide the m0 on both sides. So you have m divided by m0 equals exponential minus k plus exponential minus 3k. So now the problem wants you to find what is a k value. Okay. So basically now it gets to a more sophisticated problem. So you can still derive this because, as we know, exponential minus 3k is just a cubic of exponential minus k. Okay, so you can sort of rederive it into a, if you assume exponential minus k is a, right? So then you have converted into a plus a to the power of 3, because exponential minus 3k is the cubic of exponential minus k. So then the problem is, how do we solve this? Right? If it's to the second order, right? If it's to the order of 2, we can still use a quadratic equation, quadratic solution to find out the final solution, right? Using pencil, piece of paper, calculator. But if it's cubic, then it's getting difficult, right? So here, this is where the go-seek can start to play a role, right? So because now you have the m over m0, right? It's found to be 30% of the initial organic mass, right? So you can just put it over here. So you can start with any k, still assume it to be 1, right? And then you can see that m divided by m0 is, let's say, exponential minus k here, right? Plus exponential minus 3 multiplied by k. Okay, this is m divided by m0. And you can see that when k is 1, m divided by m0 is 0.4, right? 42% instead of 3%. So if you change to larger value, right? 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, I mean, 1.3 is quite close, but you don't have the exact value. You can keep trying, right? But an easier way to do this is you go to data, what if analysis, go seek. You want to set this value to be 0.3 by changing here. Click OK. Find out the exact solution for K. This is go seek. So we can always come back to the go seek in the future. But I think in your other classes, you're actually going to use this Excel function in your calculation. Okay. But again, you can see that the go seek is only a point by point calculation, right? And if you have a, let's say, an array of equations that you want to do go seek, then you have to do it one by one. Sort of getting back to the calculator problem. So if you have an array, how do you do that? We're going to use MATLAB. Right? So we're going to show how do you solve these problems in the future, okay, by using MATLAB. Okay, so this is the second one, solving problems with go-seek, right? It's an exponential decay of the organic pollutants. So the third example is for plotting, right? So the basic operation for plotting. So here we're using plotting, or we're using, let's say, the dissolved oxygen as an example. Again, assuming, let's imagine that we're environmental engineers trying to look at the water sample at different points of a river. Okay, so we're trying to see what is the dissolved oxygen level in the water. So dissolved oxygen is very important in the water because it basically provides, or is a lifeline, right? So, because every living organism needs oxygen, or most of the living organisms needs oxygen. The fish, the shrimp, right? The plants, right? Especially overnight when there's no photosynthesis, they need oxygen, right? If there's no oxygen, there is a special term called the deoxygenated water body, right? That's a dead zone. And nowadays, people are realizing that at the outflow of rivers, right, the bay area or the end of a river, right, the outlet of a river, it's very easy to form these these dead zones because there is a high concentration of organics, right? So the oxygen is consumed during the decomposition of the organics. Okay, so we need to make sure that there are sufficient oxygen in the water. Okay, so in terms of plotting, well, here I'm giving the example of now we're again taking the water sample. Okay, taking a bottle of water, but now we're taking the water sample at different points of the river. Okay, so or the different points of the lake, right? And then we leave our water bottle or the sampled water bottle in the lab, right? Under certain temperature, certain condition, normally under 25 degrees Celsius, right? 1 atmosphere in the incubator. And then we monitor the dissolved oxygen concentration, right? Because we know that there is organics in the water, right? There's organics, and then there are also bacteria in the water. So the dissolved oxygen concentration is going to reduce. Okay, so day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, right? So how do we show the decrease of the dissolved oxygen concentration in a plot, in an Excel plot? So basically, here we know the time. We just need to show the dissolved oxygen concentration. Okay, so what we can do is we need to first set up what is the x-axis. Okay, so if you directly use these, right, as the axis, right, and then what we can do is basically whenever we make plots, we make line plots, we have to specify x-axis and y-axis, right, and we can only include values instead of strings. So that's why we need to convert day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5 into values. So it's going to be 1 plus the previous day, right? So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you include the values here. Okay, so this is 0.1, right? And if you plot it out, it's going to look like this. And typically when we make the plots, if it's real data, then we have to use the straight line connecting the data points, okay? So this is talking about the format of the plot. So you can see that as a scatter plot, you can show with different types of lines, right? So if you want to only show the data, you can the data marker, right? You can use this plot. And then they also have these scatter the markers connected with the curved or smooth lines. If you're using real measured data, you should always use either the scatter plot or the line plots with the straight lines connecting the line plots. Only these two, right? So the curved plots is used when people are using the simulated results or even this curve simulated results. But if you're using real data, we should be using either this plot or this plot. Okay, so let's use this plot here. So you can see that the x-axis is the days, right? The y-axis is the dissolved oxygen concentration. Okay, so this is for 0.1. So we can actually plot it out for all of these data. So what we can do is now here you see there are strings above these values. So we can just delete it for now. Let's just move it somewhere else. And then you select a column and then press the control button and then select these 5 columns. And then you choose the values. Okay, you choose to make the plot. Okay, so this is what we have for these 5 points, right? So you can see that normally there are, I mean, in this plot here, there are quite many objects. So you have the chart title. Of course, we don't have a chart title, but you can name it. For example, dissolve the oxygen, right? Dissolve oxygen at 5 locations. Okay, so now the x-axis is actually time, right? But right now we don't have a label for the axis. So remember, whenever we make plots, we have to include the labels. So now to include the labels, you will just click plus sign and then axis titles, right? So now you can start to edit. Right? This is days. And then the y-axis is the dissolve oxygen, but I didn't show it here. It's milligram per liter. Okay, so you can see that what happens is that because of the organics in the bottle, the dissolved oxygen has been decreasing as a function of time. Okay, so there are also, let's say here you have the legends for different lines here, right? Unfortunately, the legends here, they're all showing the same text, dissolved oxygen, right? So you can sort of edit it a little bit, right? So you can move it, and then to edit the legend, you will go to select data. Okay. So here, basically the selection, data selection, you can further edit it, right? Because now series, it's using the series name here, but you can change to a different name. So you can edit and then just say, this is the first line, right? First line, that's 0.1. So you can just put 0.1. Okay. 0.2. 0.3. 0.4. And then 0.5. Okay, so now you have the actual actual legend for the plots. Okay, so another thing you can notice is that here, well, it looks like the font here is too small, right? And then and also the line here, it's the color is difficult, sort of difficult to tell apart, right? So then you can change the colors by, for example, using the monochromatic, right? So you can change the different sets of colors, right? So it's easier to differentiate for different points, right? Or you can also basically change these different colors yourself or choose the colors yourself. At the same time, the font is too small. So to change the font, you can go to format over here. And then, let me see. Right, the font here, right? So you can choose the font. Let's say we choose the font of 20, right? Just to make it larger. We also choose the font size of 20. Right here, the same thing, font 20. So the goal is that we want to have a plot that you can easily recognize. You can see now it's compressed a little bit, but it's okay. And then the same for the title. Font of 20. And then at the same time, I think a lot of times we prefer to use the font. Let's see. Tend to use the Arial font when we make plots. I mean, common types of font. Okay. And let's just make it bigger. So you can also change it over here, right? Okay. All right. Then, so if you want to box the plot, right? So you can also format, and then let's say solid line, black line, right? So you can have the box, right? And then if you want to change the range of the axis, for example, days, there's no day 0, right? Although, I mean, for example, if you want to extend it to 10 days, right? Instead of only to 6 days, you can set up the bounds over here. You can set it to be 10. Actually, I think 6 is pretty good now. So let's go back here, set it to be 6. And then you can change the major ticks and minor ticks, right? So you can change the major ticks to 1, right? So now it can actually show each day. And then minor ticks, that's 0.2. Let's use 0.5, although it's not changed because right now I think this is using a major tick of 1 is already occupying the space. So that's why it's not showing the minor ticks, but it's okay, right? So we have these. And if you check a lot of the, let's say, research articles, they also don't include the grid lines. So what we can do is we can also format the grid lines, and we can choose no line, right? So format the grid line, no line. Okay. So now this plot actually looks a little bit more professional. Okay. So you can also change the aspect ratio a little bit more. And then you have the results over here. So dissolved oxygen at 5 locations. Right. So you can also, because here 0 to 10 is probably too dense, you can change the marker, the major ticks, right? So instead of 1, you can use 2, right, to separate it out. And then the tick marks, the major type, you can use inside or outside, right? Let's use the inside ticks, and then also inside ticks, so you can tell, right, how the ticks looks like. Okay, so this is how you can make a plot. So if you see, basically in MATLAB, there are different types of plots. There's also the histogram, there's the pie chart. So I would say in our class, we're not going to use these charts a lot. So when we have to deal with these tables or these graphs, we can go through them later, right? So right now, I think this practice is sufficient. Okay, so now you have this set of data, right? So let's just create another plot. Okay, so for this additional plot, um, I won't do all of these formatting, although I think there's a way that you can copy the format. So format chart area, and then you can copy the format from one to another. Let me see. Format painter, and format over here. I mean, help a little bit, right? But then let's say you're just looking at the dissolved oxygen at 0.1. And now you can see that the dissolved oxygen has been decreasing. It looks like it's a linear decrease. So what about we try to correlate it, right? Because it looks very linear, right? So basically, what about we fit this data? We can actually add a trend line to this data set. Okay, so you can add an exponential trend line or linear, logarithmic, polynomial, or so on, but it looks linear. Let's just add a linear line. Okay, so you can set up a linear line. If you want to show the equation, you can also show the equation over here. You can see that R squared is actually very high. Okay, that's because when I created the data, I used linear correlation and I added some random number, right? Remember the random number I showed earlier, right? So overall, it's going to show you this sort of linear relationship over here. Okay, so you can basically use some fundamental or easy statistical tools, right, to fit the data, right, and then to find the R square. R square, a lot of times when we try to find a correlation between two data sets, we actually study or try to get the R square out of the results. Okay, so you can get it from Excel as well. And then basically, we can also include the error bar from the plot. So to create this error bar plot, what you can do is you can first generate this plot, right? This is basically the average dissolved oxygen, right? So then to add the error bar, you will click the error bar function, okay? So you select error bar and then go to more options. So then you can basically separately specify the error bar, because here you're using the standard deviation of the dissolved oxygen. So that's only going to be the error bar for the y-axis, right? So you don't have x-axis error bar. So you would delete that just by clicking the delete sign, right? So the y-axis error bar, you can go to custom and then specify the positive value, right? And the negative value. Okay. So now you can do the same type of formatting and then to create this error bar plot. Okay. So basically this is pretty much it for the Excel. And I have to say that we basically go through it quite quickly. And then these are just some of the fundamental functions or utilities that you can use for Excel. And I hope that you also practice tricks for other classes. As you know, you're now taking more engineering and more sophisticated mathematics uh, classes, right? So try to practice these skills and try to be more proficient with Excel. And if you have any questions, just feel free to let me know. Thank you.